It was one of those long, tiring evenings when the air felt heavy and every mile home seemed longer than the last. John had just finished a 12-hour shift at the construction site. His clothes smelled of dust and concrete, his hands were rough, and his back ached from bending over rebar all day. He wasn't rich, but he took pride in his work. Every paycheck meant food on the table and rent paid on time. As he drove through the quiet streets on his way home, the town lights reflected faintly on the hood of his old pickup truck. It was a peaceful night. The roads were mostly empty, and the hum of the engine was almost comforting. John turned on the radio, hoping to stay awake with some late-night talk show. He had just passed the last gas station before the stretch of dark highway that led to his neighborhood when he noticed something in the rearview mirror, headlights that seemed a little too close. At first he thought it was just another driver in a hurry, but the car stayed glued to his bumper even when the road widened. John's stomach tightened. He wasn't doing anything wrong. No speeding, no swerving, but the unease wouldn't go away. Then came the flash of red and blue lights. Great, he muttered under his breath, pulling to the side of the road. He took a deep breath and turned down the radio. He knew how to handle a traffic stop. His father had been pulled over before, for silly things, broken taillights, rolling stops, and had taught him to keep his hands visible and stay calm. He rolled down the window and waited. The police car stopped behind him and a single officer stepped out. Even from the rearview mirror, John could tell something was off about his body language. The man's movements were sharp, impatient, like he was already angry about something before even approaching the truck. The officer's boots crunched on the gravel as he approached the driver's side. His flashlight beam shot straight into John's face, making him squint. "Evening, officer," John said politely, keeping both hands on the steering wheel. The officer didn't reply. The light stayed in his eyes for a few seconds too long before lowering. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" the officer asked, his tone flat but cold. "No, sir, I don't," John said honestly. "Was I speeding?" "You took too long to pull over," the officer snapped. "That's a sign of someone hiding something." John blinked, confused. "I didn't realize, sir. I just wanted to stop somewhere safely. This stretch of road's pretty dark." "Don't talk back," the officer barked, stepping closer. "License and registration." John nodded and moved slowly, speaking as he reached for his wallet. "I'm getting my license from my back pocket." The officer's hand went straight to his holster. "Stop! Don't move!" he shouted suddenly, making John freeze. John's heart jumped into his throat. He looked up, his pulse pounding. I'm not reaching for anything dangerous, sir. Just my wallet. It's right here." "Keep your hands where I can see them," the officer yelled, voice sharp and commanding. John did as he was told, his hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. His mind raced. What did he do wrong? Was this really happening over nothing? For a few long seconds, no one spoke. Only the sound of cars passing in the distance broke the silence. Then, without warning, the officer pulled his gun out of the holster and aimed it directly at John. John's breath caught in his chest. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. "Sir, please," he began, his voice shaking. "I haven't done anything. I'm not armed." "Step out of the vehicle," the officer shouted. John's instincts screamed at him not to move. One wrong gesture, one misunderstood action, and things could spiral out of control. He swallowed hard, trying to keep his voice steady. "I just want to go home," he said softly. "Please, sir, I'm not a threat." The officer's face twisted into something close to anger. "You think you can tell me how to do my job? Step out now." John hesitated but slowly opened the door with one hand visible at all times. He stepped out carefully, standing by the open door, both palms raised in the air. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. The night air felt colder now. The highway was silent except for the soft chirping of crickets. The police car's flashing lights painted the road in streaks of red and blue. "Turn around," the officer commanded. John did. "Hands on the truck." John placed his hands on the cool metal of the truck's side, the rough paint under his fingers grounding him in the moment. He could feel the weight of the officer's eyes on him, and the gun that hadn't been holstered yet. The officer began talking again, his tone mocking. "You think you can act smart with me? You think I don't see what you're up to? Middle of the night, empty road, nervous as hell. I've seen your type before. John didn't respond. He didn't even look up. He just kept breathing slowly, praying this would end peacefully. After what felt like an eternity, another set of headlights appeared in the distance. A car slowed down as it passed, and then stopped a few yards ahead. John didn't turn around, but he could hear a door open. Someone had gotten out. The officer cursed under his breath. "Keep your eyes forward," he snapped. A voice from behind called out cautiously, "Hey, officer, is everything okay here?" John didn't move, but relief flickered in his chest. Someone had seen. "Move along," the officer barked. "Police business." But the stranger didn't leave. The voice spoke again, this time firmer. "I'm recording this, sir, for your safety and his." The officer stiffened. For the first time that night, there was a pause, a long, heavy silence. John could sense the shift. The power in the moment, the control the officer had been gripping so tightly, began to crack. The flashlight lowered. The gun finally wavered, then disappeared into its holster. "All right," the officer muttered, as if trying to sound casual. "You can relax now." John didn't move. "Can I put my hands down, sir?" Yeah, fine," the officer said quickly, his voice less sharp now. I thought you were reaching for something. Standard procedure." John turned slowly to face him. The officer's face was flushed, a mix of anger and embarrassment. John wanted to say something, but the words stuck in his throat. He was too stunned, too shaken. "Get back in your vehicle," the officer ordered. "You can go." John blinked in disbelief. "That's it?" "Yeah, that's it. You're free to go." John got back in the truck, hands still trembling slightly. His heart hadn't yet slowed down. He started the engine, but before driving off, he glanced in the mirror. The stranger, who had recorded the scene, was still standing by their car, holding up the phone, watching quietly. John gave a small nod of gratitude, then drove away. The rest of the ride home was silent. The radio was off. Every passing streetlight felt too bright, every shadow too dark. He couldn't shake the image of the gun pointed at him, for no reason at all. When he pulled into his driveway, he sat there for a few minutes before getting out. His hands were still gripping the steering wheel tightly. He stepped out, locked the truck, and stood in the quiet night air. The crickets were still singing, the same as they had been an hour ago. But something in him had changed. He'd always believed that if you were honest and respectful, things would go right. That the law existed to protect people like him, hard-working, law-abiding, doing their best to get by. But tonight had shown him something else entirely. Inside his small house, he dropped his keys on the counter and sat down on the couch. He didn't even turn on the lights. His dog came over and rested its head on his knee, sensing the tension. John rubbed the dog's fur absently and stared at the wall. He thought about how quickly things had gone from ordinary to terrifying, how easily one person's bad attitude could turn a peaceful night into a nightmare. He didn't know who that stranger was, the one who had stopped and recorded, but he was grateful beyond words. Without that, who knows how the night might have ended. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Every time John closed his eyes, he saw the beam of the flashlight, the officer's hand on the gun, the way his voice echoed in the dark. But beneath, the fear, another feeling began to grow. A quiet anger, not the kind that lashes out, but the kind that fuels determination. He promised himself he wouldn't let this slide. Not because he wanted revenge, but because no one should have to feel that helpless for simply driving home. And though he didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning of a story that would change not only his life, but also the officers, in a way neither of them could have imagined. The next morning, John woke up feeling like he hadn't slept at all. His alarm buzzed on the nightstand, but for a moment he just stared at the ceiling, trying to process everything that had happened the night before. It almost felt unreal, like a bad dream that clung to him even after the sun came up. But when he sat up and saw his work clothes still hanging over the chair and his truck keys sitting on the counter, the memory came rushing back. The flashing lights, the angry voice, the gun. He rubbed his eyes and let out a deep breath. His Dog was sitting by the bed, tail wagging softly, unaware of the storm still brewing in John's mind. "Hey, buddy," John murmured, giving the dog a gentle pat. "Rough night, huh?" He got up, brewed a pot of coffee, and sat quietly at the kitchen table. The smell of coffee filled the room, but it did little to comfort him. His mind kept replaying the officer's voice, the anger, the threats, the way he had felt completely powerless. He thought about how easily things could have gone worse, how that stranger's decision to stop and record might have saved his life. It was one of those long, tiring evenings when he didn't know who they were, but he hoped that video existed. He hoped someone out there had proof of what really happened. When he got to work that morning, he tried to focus. But his coworkers noticed something was off. He wasn't his usual self. "You all right, man?" one of them asked during lunch break. John nodded automatically. Yeah, just didn't sleep much. He didn't want to talk about it, not yet. Part of him was still trying to make sense of it all. But as the day went on, it became harder to ignore the feeling that something needed to be done. That night, after dinner, John sat at his small desk with his laptop open. He hesitated for a moment, then searched for the local police department's internal affairs division. He found a page where citizens could file complaints. He stared at the form for a while before typing a single sentence. "I was pulled over last night by an officer who drew his gun on me for no reason." His hands shook slightly as he continued typing, describing the stop in as much detail as he could remember. He didn't exaggerate anything. He didn't need to. The truth was bad enough. When he finished, he clicked submit. For a few seconds, he just sat there staring at the confirmation message on the screen. He didn't know if it would make a difference. Maybe they'd ignore it. Maybe nothing would come of it. But at least he had done something. 2 days passed before he got a call from a blocked number. "Hello?" John answered, unsure what to expect. "Is this Mr. John Miller?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, it is. This is Officer Rivera from Internal Affairs. We received your complaint regarding an incident involving one of our officers. I'd like to schedule a time for you to come in and give a statement." John felt his pulse quicken. "Of course," he said. "When can I come?" "Tomorrow morning, if that works." "Yeah, that's fine." When he hung up, he felt a strange mix of nervousness and relief. Something was finally moving. The next day, he arrived at the police department just after 9. The building was tall and cold-looking, made of gray concrete and glass. He hesitated before going in, feeling that familiar unease return, but he reminded himself he wasn't the one who had done anything wrong. Inside, he was greeted by Officer Rivera, a calm woman in a plain uniform. She led him into a small interview room. "Please have a seat," she said kindly. "I just need you to tell me everything that happened in your own words." John took a deep breath and began. He told her about the drive home, the flashing lights, how the officer had pulled a gun on him for simply reaching for his wallet. He mentioned the stranger who had stopped and recorded the scene, and how that might still exist somewhere online. Rivera listened carefully, taking notes. She didn't interrupt or rush him. When he finished, she nodded slowly. "Thank you for coming forward, Mr. Miller. I know this kind of thing isn't easy to talk about." "Do you know who the officer was?" he asked quietly. Rivera's expression didn't change much, but her tone softened. "We believe it was Officer Daniels." The name made John's stomach tighten. He didn't know the man personally, but after that night he would never forget his face. "Has he done this before?" John asked. Rivera paused. "I can't share details of other cases, but I can tell you that your complaint will be taken seriously." John nodded. He wanted to believe her. When he left the building, the morning sun was bright, but he still felt a heaviness in his chest. He had done his part, but what would happen next was out of his hands. That evening, as he sat at home watching TV, his phone buzzed with a message from one of his coworkers. "Hey, is this you?" There was a link attached. John clicked it, and his heart nearly stopped. It was the video. Someone had posted it online. The title read, "Officer pulls gun on unarmed man during traffic stop." John's hands shook as he watched the short clip. There he was, standing by his truck, hands raised, looking terrified. The video wasn't long, but it showed everything. The shouting, the gun drawn, the officer's tone. The comment section was already filling up. People were angry. "This is unacceptable. Fire that cop. He needs to be held accountable." John's name wasn't mentioned anywhere, and he was grateful for that. But he knew this video was going to spread. By the next morning it had. The local news picked it up. The story was everywhere, on social media, on local blogs, even on the evening news. The police department couldn't ignore it now. At the station, Officer Daniels was called into the captain's office. He walked in with a scowl on his face, clearly annoyed. "You wanted to see me, sir?" he said, standing stiffly. The captain slid a tablet across the desk. "Explain this." Daniels looked down at the video playing on the screen. His face hardened. "Someone edited this. It doesn't show what really happened." The captain didn't look convinced. "We'll find out. Until then, you're on temporary leave." "What? You can't suspend me over some internet nonsense." Daniels snapped. "Watch your tone, officer," the captain said firmly. "Internal affairs will handle it." Daniels stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind him. He couldn't believe this was happening. In his mind, he had just been doing his job, keeping control. That's what he told himself. But deep down, something inside him felt uneasy. Meanwhile, John's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Friends, neighbors, even reporters were trying to reach him. He ignored most of them, but one call stood out. It was from the same internal affairs officer, Rivera. "John," she said, "we've seen the video. Thank you for mentioning it in your report. It's helping us confirm your statement." "Does that mean something will be done?" he asked. "Yes," she replied simply. "This changes things." The following week was a blur. The department launched an official investigation, and the story continued to spread. People in the community began talking about police behavior, about fairness, about accountability. John didn't want fame or attention. He just wanted the truth acknowledged. But now it wasn't just about him. It had become something bigger. One evening, he stopped by the local store to pick up groceries. As he waited in line, an older man behind him tapped his shoulder. "Hey," the man said quietly. "You're the guy from that video, aren't you?" John hesitated. "Yeah," he said softly. The man nodded. "I saw it. I'm glad you made it home safe." What that officer did wasn't right. John thanked him and walked out to his truck, feeling something he hadn't felt in days. Validation. Maybe people were finally seeing what he had experienced firsthand. Across town, though, Officer Daniels sat in his living room fuming. The TV played the news report about his suspension. His phone buzzed with messages from co-workers, some supportive, others distant. He felt cornered, angry, and humiliated. "This is ridiculous," he muttered to himself. "One video, and they act like I'm the bad guy." But the more he replayed the video, the harder it became to justify what he'd done. He saw himself yelling, pointing his weapon at a man who was clearly scared and compliant. No matter how he framed it in his head, it didn't look good. For the first time, doubt crept in. Days turned into weeks. The department remained tight-lipped about the investigation, but inside, pressure was mounting. The public wanted answers. The mayor wanted accountability. And the officers who had once ignored Daniel's temper now began to distance themselves. Meanwhile, John tried to live normally. He went to work, took care of his dog, called his mother on Sundays. But the memory of that night still lingered in small ways. How he gripped the steering wheel a little tighter when a police car drove by. How his heart skipped when someone in uniform raised their voice. One afternoon, while scrolling through his phone, he saw a post from the stranger who had recorded the video. It was a simple message. Sometimes doing the right thing means stopping when others drive past. John stared at it for a long time. He wanted to thank them in person someday. Because of that one act, the truth had come to light. He didn't know what would happen next and if justice would really be served. But he felt a small spark of hope. What had started as a night of fear was slowly turning into a story of accountability, and deep down, John knew this wasn't over yet. The real reckoning, for both him and the officer, was still to come. The days after the video went viral felt strange for John. Everywhere he went, people seemed to recognize him. Some gave him sympathetic smiles. Others offered quiet nods of support. He didn't want fame. He just wanted his normal life back. He wasn't angry at every officer. He knew there were good ones out there, but he couldn't ignore what had happened to him. Every time he replayed that night in his mind, his chest tightened. It wasn't about ego or pride anymore. It was about right and wrong. One evening, while sitting in his living room, John received a call from Officer Rivera again. "John, this is Rivera from Internal Affairs," she said. "I wanted to update you on the investigation." John sat up straight. "Yes, of course. We've reviewed the video and matched it with your statement. Several witnesses have come forward as well, including the person who recorded the footage. We're now moving into the formal review stage. There will be interviews with the officer involved and his supervisors." John listened carefully. "Does that mean he could face punishment?" "It means," she said gently, "that if the findings confirm misconduct, there will be consequences. I can't say more yet, but things are moving in the right direction." John thanked her and hung up. For the first time in weeks, he felt a small bit of relief, but he knew it wasn't over. That night, he went for a walk around his neighborhood. The air was cool, the streets quiet. He passed a few houses where families were sitting on porches talking and laughing. Everything seemed peaceful, just the way it should have been that night he was pulled over. He thought about what the officer had said, how quickly he had judged him, how easily things could have ended differently. He shook his head, wishing no one else would ever have to go through that. A few days later, Rivera called again. "John, would you be willing to come in and give a formal recorded statement for the case file?" "Yes, of course," he replied. When he arrived at the station, he noticed the tension in the air. The video had caused quite a stir inside the department. Some officers avoided eye contact, while others gave him respectful nods. It was clear that the incident had opened a conversation many had been avoiding. Rivera led him to a quiet office and set up a recorder. "Just speak naturally," she said. "Tell us everything from your perspective," John did. He explained again what happened step by step, his tone steady but firm. Rivera asked questions, taking notes as he spoke. When it was done, she thanked him for his honesty and courage. As he was leaving the building, John caught a glimpse of Officer Daniels through a hallway window. Daniels was sitting at a desk, looking pale and tense, his usual arrogance replaced by something else, uncertainty. Their eyes met briefly before John looked away. He didn't feel satisfaction or revenge, just a quiet sadness that it had to come to this. Over the next few weeks, things began to unfold. The department announced that an independent committee would review the case. Local reporters covered the story, and people in the community started speaking out. At the diner John often visited, he overheard a group of older men discussing it. "It's about time they start holding people accountable," one said. "Not all cops are bad," another added, but that one went too far. John didn't join the conversation. He just finished his coffee, quietly grateful that people were talking about it. Not about him, but about what needed to change. One afternoon, he received a letter in the mail. It was from a local law firm. Inside was a note. "We represent individuals in civil rights cases. If you'd like to discuss your experience, we can offer a consultation at no cost." John stared at the letter for a long time. He wasn't the kind of man who liked lawsuits or drama, but deep down he knew what had happened wasn't just wrong, it was dangerous. And if nothing was done, it could happen to someone else. He decided to call the lawyer he met with, a calm and thoughtful man named Mr. Carter. Listened carefully as John explained everything. "John," he said after a while, "you have a very strong case here. The video evidence alone is powerful, but the fact that the officer was already under review for past complaints strengthens it even more." "Past complaints?" John repeated, surprised. "Yes," Carter said. "He's had several reports filed against him over the years, mostly about aggressive behavior and unnecessary force. None of them reached the public until now." John leaned back in his chair, feeling a mixture of shock and disappointment. "So they knew?" "Some people did," Carter said carefully. "But these things often get buried until something big brings them out." John sighed. "I don't want to ruin anyone's life. I just want accountability," Carter nodded. "And that's exactly what this kind of case is about. Accountability. If you're ready, we'll start the paperwork." After a moment of thought, John nodded. "Let's do it." News of the civil case spread quickly. The media began following it closely, interviewing community members and experts about police conduct and trust. Meanwhile, Officer Daniels found himself in an unfamiliar position. Silence. He had been ordered to stay home pending the investigation, his badge and gun temporarily taken away. For years he'd walked around with authority and confidence, but now every time he looked in the mirror, All he saw was a man whose temper had cost him everything. He avoided going out, afraid of being recognized. The neighbors whispered. Even his colleagues stopped returning his calls. At night, he replayed the video in his mind, trying to convince himself it was all exaggerated. But the truth was hard to ignore. He had let his ego take control, and now the world had seen it. Inside the department, Captain Reeves held a meeting with the leadership team. "This isn't just about one officer anymore," he said. "It's about how we handle complaints and accountability. The public's watching." Some officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The video had started discussions that many preferred to avoid. Back at home, John's days slowly returned to something like normal. He went back to work, saw friends, and tried to move forward. But every so often, he'd receive a message from someone who had seen the video. People thanked him for speaking up, for staying calm, for showing courage. He didn't feel like a hero. He just felt human, someone who had been scared but had chosen not to stay silent. Weeks later, he was called in again, this time to give testimony before the committee. The room was formal but not intimidating. A few officials sat behind a table, and Rivera was there too. Mr. Miller, one of the panel members, said, "Thank you for coming. We appreciate your cooperation. We'd like you to recount the events one more time, and then we may have some follow-up questions." John nodded. His hands were steady this time. He spoke clearly, describing the night just as he remembered it. The panel listened carefully, and when he finished, one of them said quietly, "We're sorry that happened to you." Those words, though simple, felt heavier than he expected. When the session ended, Rivera met him outside the room. "You did well, John," she said with a small smile. "You've been strong through all of this." "Thank you," he replied. "I just hope something good comes from it." "It will," she said. "Change takes time, but it starts with people like you." A few weeks later, the committee released its findings. The report concluded that Officer Daniels had used unnecessary and excessive intimidation during the stop and had violated multiple departmental policies. The department publicly apologized to John and announced new training programs for officers focused on communication and de-escalation. When John heard the news, he didn't cheer or celebrate. He just sat quietly, feeling a sense of closure he hadn't realized he needed. Later that week, he went out to the same stretch of road where it all began. The night was calm again, the same hum of crickets in the background. He parked his truck, turned off the engine, and just sat there for a while. It felt different now. Not haunted, just finished. As he looked out at the quiet highway, he thought about how one moment of fear had turned into something much bigger, how one person's bad decision had forced change, not just for him but for others too. He took a deep breath, feeling lighter. The story wasn't over. There were still legal steps ahead, and he knew the road to real change was long. But in that quiet moment, sitting under the soft glow of the streetlights, John realized something important. He had found his voice again. Months had passed since that terrible night, and the world around John had changed in ways he never expected. What began as a quiet drive home had turned into a story that shook the small town, stirred conversations, and forced the police department to look hard at itself. For John, the noise had started to fade a little. Reporters stopped calling, the social media attention slowed down, and his life began to settle. He liked it that way. All he ever wanted was peace. Not fame, not recognition, just peace. Still, the case wasn't over. The civil lawsuit was moving forward, and the internal hearing for Officer Daniels was about to begin. John tried not to think about it too much, but as the date got closer, the weight of it grew heavier. One morning, his lawyer, Mr. Carter, called. "John, we've got a date for the hearing," he said. "Next Tuesday. You'll need to testify again, but it shouldn't be anything too difficult. Just the truth like before." "I can do that," John said. "I've already told the truth a dozen times." "I know," Carter said gently. "But this time it's not just about the facts. It's about how it affected you. They need to understand the human side of what happened." John nodded, even though Carter couldn't see him. "All right, I'll be ready." That night, John sat on his porch with a cup of coffee in his hands. The air was cool, the stars dim above the small town. His dog lay by his feet, half asleep. He thought about what Carter said, the human side. He remembered how powerless he had felt that night, how small, the cold fear in his chest when the gun was pointed at him, He thought about the sleepless nights afterward, the jump he felt every time he saw flashing lights in the distance. Those weren't just memories. They were scars that hadn't fully healed. He took a slow breath. He was ready to speak, but more importantly, he was ready to be heard. The day of the hearing arrived quickly. John wore a plain gray suit, one he had borrowed from a friend. He wasn't a man who liked dressing up, but he wanted to show respect. As he walked into the courthouse, he noticed a few reporters waiting outside, cameras in hand. He ignored them, focusing on the doors ahead. Inside, the room was quiet. A few officials sat at the front, lawyers on either side, and in the middle of it all, Officer Daniels. He looked different, less confident, more tired. His face showed the strain of months of public scrutiny. When John entered, Daniels avoided eye contact. Carter leaned toward John and whispered, "Just stay calm. You're doing the right thing. When the hearing be gay." But neither is being someone who's afraid of what might happen during a traffic stop. Fear goes both ways. Respect has to go both ways, too. When he finished, there was silence for a few seconds. Then one of the older officers raised his hand. "I've been on the job 20 years, he said quietly. "I've seen good days and bad ones. What happened to you? It shouldn't have. Thank you for standing up. It helps us do better." That simple statement meant more to John than any award or headline ever could. As time went on, he started working with a small local group that focused on building stronger relationships between the community and law enforcement. They organized events where people could talk openly, ask questions, and share their experiences. John became a quiet leader in that effort. He never shouted or demanded attention. He just listened, spoke honestly, and showed people that progress was possible. Then one day, something unexpected happened. He was helping set up chairs for a town event when someone tapped him on the shoulder. He turned around, and there stood Officer Daniels. John froze for a moment. Daniels looked older, maybe from stress or guilt, but his posture was different, humbler. "Hey," Daniels said softly, "can I talk to you for a minute?" John hesitated but nodded. They stepped aside, away from the noise of the setup. "I didn't know if I should come," Daniels said, "but I've been going through a lot of reflection lately. The department changed me in a good way, and I wanted to tell you in person that I'm sorry. Not just for that night, but for the way I treated people before it. You made me see what I couldn't see before." John studied him for a moment. The apology wasn't rehearsed. It was real. "I appreciate you saying that," John said finally. "It means something. I hope you found some peace too." Daniels nodded. "I'm trying. I left the force a few months ago. I'm working with a community program now, helping young people who want to go into law enforcement. I tell them your story sometimes." "I hope that's all right," John smiled faintly. "If it helps them understand what respect really means." "It's all right." They shook hands, not as enemies, but as two men who had learned from pain and change. As Daniels walked away, John felt something lift inside him. Not forgiveness exactly, but closure. For the first time in a long time, he felt completely free. Over the following months, life settled into a steady rhythm. John's work at the construction company continued, and his evenings were spent volunteering or visiting schools. His story became part of the town's quiet transformation, a reminder that even dark moments could lead to light if people had the courage to face them. One night, he sat on his porch again, like he often did, with his dog at his feet and the sound of crickets in the air. The sky was clear, dotted with stars, and the road stretched out ahead, peaceful and still. He thought about everything that had happened, and the fear, the anger, the fight for justice, and the unexpected moments of understanding. He realized that while he couldn't erase what had happened, he had turned it into something good. He had found purpose in pain. The next morning, he woke up early and went for a drive, the same route he had taken that night so long ago. The same road, but this time it felt different, lighter. He turned on the radio and smiled as a familiar song played. At the spot where it had all begun, he slowed down and looked around. The world hadn't changed much. The trees still lined the road. The same streetlights flickered in the distance. But he had changed. He whispered quietly to himself, "You made it." From that day on, John continued to live with quiet dignity. He wasn't seeking fame or attention. He just wanted to make sure his story reminded people of something simple yet powerful. That respect should never depend on power, and that accountability doesn't have to come from anger. It can come from honesty, courage, and humanity. Years later, when people in town told newcomers about the man who stood up to injustice and helped change the way things worked, they didn't talk about fear or confrontation. They talked about how one person's strength and patience had turned a painful moment into a turning point for everyone. And that was John's legacy. Not the night he was wronged, but the way he turned it into something that made others better. The expensive lesson wasn't just for the officer who had once misused his authority. It was for everyone, a reminder that humility, compassion, and understanding are worth far more than pride or anger. As John grew older, he kept that truth close. He didn't need awards or recognition. He had peace, and for him that was the greatest reward of all. One evening, he sat with a friend watching the sunset. His friend turned to him and said, "You know, you could have walked away from all this." "Most people would have," John smiled. "Yeah," he said softly. "But if I had, maybe nothing would have changed." The friend nodded. "You ever think about what that officer's doing now?" "Sometimes," John said. "But not in anger. I just hope he's helping people now the right way." They sat quietly as the sun disappeared behind the hills. It wasn't about victory or revenge anymore. It was about peace, the kind that comes from knowing you did the right thing even when it was hard. John had found that peace. And in doing so, he had given it to others too. The road ahead was open and calm, and for the first time in a long time he was ready to keep driving, not away from the past, but toward a future he had helped make a little better.